Hey art nerds! Today we're talking about the ShinHan PWC watercolors. These were purchased at David's Art Supply in Metairie, Louisiana just before the quarantine started, and I'm really excited to get to share these with you guys today. So I've been aware of the PWC watercolors for a while. In fact, I've been aware of ShinHan as a company for a while. A while back, I unboxed and swatched the ShinHan Professional Watercolor Set, and I've used ShinHan alcohol markers along with my Copic markers for years. In general, I'm pretty pleased with ShinHan's quality, and I expect the same sort of performance from their watercolors. Like I mentioned, I found these out in the wild at David's Art Supply, and I was really excited about these because in the past when I've priced them, they tend to be really pricey on Amazon, but the price was great. Around $6 for a Series A tube, and the mixing color set that you guys see here was around $35. So I figured if I liked the PWC watercolors, this could be a great economical alternative to some of the more expensive brands that I currently use. Like I mentioned, we talked about the ShinHan Professional Watercolors in the past, and I've also reviewed Magellan, another Korean watercolor brand. So for this review, I'm intentionally avoiding other PW reviews available online, and there are quite a few of them. I don't want to prejudice my opinion. I want to go into this just clean and straight. So the tubes might look familiar. They look a lot like the old Holbein tubes. On the front, they have the color number, they have the color name, they have the light fast information and the transparency information, and they also have the series number. Then on the back, they contain pigment information. I also picked up a bottle of Korean painting glue. We'll talk about that way later on in the video, and we may explore that as a standalone product in its own video. Now, not reading other reviews doesn't mean I didn't do any research. So, what are PWC watercolor? And this is from the ShinHan site. They're extra fine artist watercolor. They're crafted with the highest quality pigments in the finest high-grade gum arabic. So these are made with gum arabic, not the painting glue you guys see over there. And this is to enhance the clarity and depth of color. Single pigments have been used whenever possible, and the usage of mixed pigments has also been limited. Using single pigments, watercolors are less prone to fading and the consistency of colors are improved. PWC offers exceptional clarity and transparency that artists desire, along with superior light fastness and to resist fading. PWC is ideal for spread techniques and color overlapping, bringing out the best in watercolor paper. The color palette offers a total of 84 colors that are transparent and subtle, yet intense and vibrant. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Allowing for an even greater freedom of expression. So these are single pigment watercolors for the most part. There's 84 total colors, and they're bound with gum arabic, just like Western watercolors that we're familiar with over here. So they offer 84 very pure and exuberant colors, carefully selected fine pigments, high-grade gum arabic vehicle, highest grade of light fastness, maximum degree of transparency. So we're going to start swatching these watercolor. The PWC is not their traditional Korean colors line. I'd love to try that in the future. I've already got some picked out on Amazon because I love the color palette of traditional Chinese and Japanese watercolors, and I prefer muted softer colors, and the traditional Korean colors seem to offer that sort of lineup with a few exceptions. These remind me a bit of the Holbein Irodori line. It's mostly just surface level though, as well as Marie's Professional Chinese Watercolors. With Chinese watercolor and Gensai watercolor, the colors are more opaque and are designed for thicker application. And before swatching, I wondered if the PWC would fall into this category or if they're similar to Magellan, which offers gorgeous transparency and easy testing, or easy handling, apologies. In fact, on that note, we are going to be comparing these to some Magellan colors a little bit later on in the video. So I've used a Copic marker to draw some black lines on my Blick cotton rag watercolor paper. This is going to allow us to test for transparency. So for today's review, I not only want to unbox and swatch these PWC watercolors, I want to compare them against the ShinHan professional watercolors we unboxed and swatched a while back, as well as lightly compare them against Magellan, Holbein's Irodori line, and Marie's professional Chinese watercolor. So we're going to start by swatching the mixing set. I've just applied a little bit to the Teflon coating I have on my desk. And we're going to start with a mask tone, then we're going to do a gradiated wash, and then we're going to do a mask tone over the line to test for transparency. Just in general though, these are really nice. They have intense color. They're reminiscent of the Magellan watercolor in terms of quality. They may be a little bit more opaque than Magellan, and they have very fine granulation. You're not going to get a lot of color separation or sedimentation with these watercolors. The colors you'd think would be more opaque, the ones similar to the traditional palette and similar to those commonly found in Chinese and Japanese watercolors, are definitely more opaque. In fact, those are the ones that are multi-pigment rather than single pigment. But not all the colors in this lineup are like this. So far, I find that these handle very well and offer some lovely colors. I'm going to allow these to dry fully and then do a lift test once I finish swatching. I also want to point out that I have the show notes down in the description below. If you have a little bit of difficulty following my words, there will be a text version down in the description. And throughout this video, I'm also going to have some of the other products mentioned in this video and reviewed here on this channel linked. If you're interested in more professional grade watercolor reviews, this channel has a lot of them, so I highly recommend you check out my watercolor playlist. If you're looking for watercolor tutorials, I've got you covered with quick and easy watercolor tutorials, as well as with watercolor basics. So the colors in the PWC mixing set are Burnt Sienna, which is Series A. It's number 665. It has a light fastness of 3 stars, and it should be fully transparent. Permanent Violet, 643. It's Series D, so one of the more expensive colors. The light fastness is 2, and it should be fully transparent. Cobalt Blue, which is Series B and number 618. It has a light fastness of 3 and it's semi-transparent. Viridian Hue, which is 582. It's Series A. It has a light fastness of 3 and should be fully transparent. Permanent Yellow, which is number 548. It's in Series A. It has a light fastness of 2 and it should be fully transparent. And Permanent Red, which is 512. It's in Series A and it has a light fastness of 3 and it should be fully transparent. I also picked up some colors to kind of round out that collection, as well as some colors that I just genuinely enjoyed. So I'll swatch those in a minute, but the mixing color set has 6 colors in it, and at David's it's around $35, which is a really good price when you consider the size of these tubes. They're 15 milliliter or 0.5 fluid ounce metal tubes with a plastic cap, very reminiscent of the Holbein tubes, and the caps are actually fairly easy to open and there's no metal liner on the inside. So the extra colors, the bonus colors I picked up were Ultramarine Light, number 621, it's in Series B, light fastness of 2 and it should be fully transparent. Yellow Ochre, 674, it's in Series A, it has a light fastness of 3 and it's semi-opaque. Purple Gray, 650, it's in Series A, it has a light fastness of 1 and it's opaque. Prussian Blue, 625, it's in Series A, it has a light fastness of 2 and it's fully transparent. And Brilliant Pink, which is 519, it's in Series B, it has a light fastness of 2 and it's fairly opaque. So we're going to start swatching those colors now. So when I'm looking at watercolor, when I'm considering watercolor to purchase, I'm thinking about a lot of different things. I'm not a fine art watercolor artist. I'm more of a watercolor comic artist, so my needs are very different from your average watercolor artist. I do like colors that tend to be highly saturated because in that case, a little goes a long way. I also really like single pigment colors when available and when I can afford them because they tend to make for cleaner mixes and I tend to have fewer lifting problems. I'm open to a variety of sedimentations and granulations in terms of paints. I love love Daniel Smith, and I find those to be highly sedimenting. I also really like Magellan and Holbein, which tend to be very finely ground. When I'm using watercolor, I have a daily driver palette, which I'll link a video to that in the cards so you guys can check it out. And I use all sorts of different brands in my daily driver palette because different brands are going to offer different working qualities. I'm not brand loyal, I'm not brand specific, and I'm very open to trying watercolors from other countries. In fact, I have a whole playlist of art supplies from around the world because even though I live in the US, I'm fully cognizant that while we have a few good brands, we don't have the monopoly on good brands. And just in general, art supplies in the US tend to be more expensive than they are in their country of origin. So if you're interested in these PWC watercolors, I highly recommend you shop around for the best price because honestly, Amazon price on these is crazy stupid and they may be more difficult to find. That's why I was so excited when I found them at David's Art Supply. David's Art Supply is a little local art supply shop in Louisiana. I've been going there for years and they always have things that are exciting and surprising to me, and they often carry unusual brands that I can't find at larger stores like Plaza or Jerry's or Blick. And we have no sort of relationship or sponsorship other than I'm a customer who just really enjoys shopping there and I enjoy their products. So generally when I'm buying watercolor, used to be I would avoid more opaque colors, but as time has progressed, I've started collecting more of Holbein's sort of PW inclusive colors. So that's why I also picked up Brilliant Pink and Purple Gray. They just seem like beautiful colors that I could get a lot of use out of. You can see even while these are still wet, we're really not getting a lot of granulation, and you do get some water blowback in these. So if you're someone who really uses the sedimentation and the pigments to help kind of inform your work, like if you use a lot of Daniel Smith, for example, these watercolors are going to be a bit too finely milled for you. However, they are going to be more likely to stain because they're so finely milled, and you're going to be able to layer them a whole lot. So next, I want to try putting these in half pans and letting those dry. And I'm going to use the half pans rather than the tubes in my field test video because as a watercolor artist, I very rarely use watercolor straight from the tube. I very frequently use watercolor that's been dried out in half pans. So that's a quality I like to test for. It travels a little bit more easily. It's definitely more convenient for me. And for me personally, it generates less waste. So I'm just filling some half pans that I got off of Amazon. And I'm going to be kicking the crummy Arteza tube watercolors out of a palette. And I'm going to be putting these watercolors in that palette instead. In fact, those watercolors are going in the garbage because they're terrible. So when pouring the half pans, I noticed that these don't seem to contain an inordinate amount of binder. When I squeezed out paint, it wasn't like big puddles of binder, and there doesn't seem to be separation issues within the tubes, which is a problem with some other brands. It'll be interesting to see how these set up in half pans. The Magellan dries fine, but can get a little bit soupy when it's reactivated. I don't necessarily see that as a problem, just something that I'm aware of when I'm starting my watercolors. Some brands really need the time to reactivate. Daniel Smith, Winsor Newton, those are brands that really need some lead time. But then honey-based watercolors like the Saint-Allier or the M. Grahams, if you add too much water, they basically turn to glue. So it'll be interesting to see how these reconstitute because they are gum Arabic based, but they seem to be really well dispersed within the tubes themselves. Also, the tubes are very high quality tubes, comparable to the Holbein, comparable to maybe a little thinner than Daniel Smith, comparable to Winsor Newton, and they're generously sized and easy to handle. Now, don't these half pans look pretty? Some of these colors really show up well in the in mass tone like this. Some of that is because some of them do include white or optical brighteners, and some of them are just brighter colors like permanent red and yellow. But then you can also see the mass tone for like Viridian Hue, the purple, and for one of the blues is really very dark. All right, so these have had a chance to dry. Next, we're going to be doing our lift test, and I'm switching away from the softer silver black velvet brush to a synthetic brush because that's going to be just a little more prone to lifting, a little bit more prone to scrubbing. Now, I don't expect these to really lift a whole lot because they're so finely granulated. It just tends to be that finely granulated paints that don't have a lot of sedimentation tend to be incredibly staining. So while I'm laying out my paints, I just want to go through the pigment information with you guys because I know many of you are interested in that. You'll also be able to find that down in the description below. Burnt Sienna uses PR101. It's a single pigment paint. Permanent Violet uses PV3, another single pigment paint. Cobalt Blue uses PB28, another single pigment paint. Viridian Hue uses PG7. Single pigment there as well. Permanent Yellow uses PY1, and Permanent Red uses PR202. So all the mixing colors are single pigment colors. Ultramarine Light uses PB29. That's a pretty common pigment for ultramarines. Yellow Ochre uses PY42. Purple Gray is one of our two multi-pigment paints. It's PR122 and then PW6, which isn't surprising because it's marked as opaque. Our other semi-opaque to opaque paint is Brilliant Pink, which uses PR202 and PW6, and it is fully opaque. And then we have Prussian Blue, which uses PB27. So yet another single pigment paint, and it really seems like, with a couple of exceptions, ShinHan means it when they say they're aiming for mostly single pigment paint. So that's pretty exciting because at the price point I was able to find at David's, these are really affordable. So almost all of the single pigment colors are very lift resistant. They're highly staining, probably due to the really fine pigment particle size. The two pigments mixed with PW6, so Brilliant Pink and Purple Gray, are slightly more liftable, probably due to the addition of the PW6. I find that opaque colors are often more prone to reactivation. So I mentioned earlier in the video that I wanted to compare these to the ShinHan Professional Watercolors. I do want to point out that the naming scheme is a bit confusing. PWC probably also means Professional Watercolors. On the side of the box it says Premium PWC, Extra Fine Artist Watercolors. So perhaps having some way to differentiate between the two lines would be really helpful. I feel like in the past when I reviewed the professional watercolors, they handled a bit like student grade watercolors, very, very nice student grade watercolors, but they were still a bit like student grade watercolors. This set of ShinHan Professional Watercolors has 12 tubes. These are smaller tubes. They're about half the size of the PWC. And the professional tubes look a lot like student grade watercolor tubes, like Cotman or Van Gogh, whereas the PWC looks similar to professional Japanese brands like Holbein. In these sets, there's a few colors in common: yellow, ochre, viridian hue, and a few more that we're going to talk about a little bit later. The number system differs differs between the two levels. In ShinHan Professional, the number for yellow ochre is 413, and the pigments used are PY42 and PY83, and there's no series listing, which is common for student grade watercolor, which are all at the same price point. For PWC, the number is 674. The pigment used is PY42, so it's single pigment rather than multi-pigment, and the yellow ochre falls into Series A, which is the least expensive. Both lines show light-fast information as well as opacity information on the tube, which I greatly appreciate because many student grade brands don't provide pigment information. You have to kind of hound them for it. Viridian Hue shares more in common. They have the same pigment, PG7, and both are single pigment hues. Viridian is 582 in PWC and 410 in the professional watercolor line. The student grade professional and PWC aren't that dissimilar. You'll see that a little bit later on as we go into swatching. However, I personally have not seen the ShinHan Professional Watercolor sold in stores. I had to purchase mine online on Amazon a while back. So that kind of, for me, accessibility is a big part of my preference for watercolors. That's why you guys haven't seen me use a lot of Schmincke yet. I just can't really get it over here. So if I can't get a hold of watercolors fairly easily, either through a common online portal or through a local shop or a big box shop, it's harder for me to recommend them because while it's all cool to find hidden gems, it's hard to recommend hidden gems that nobody can find. The student grade or the professional watercolors, because they do have something aimed at younger students. This is more aimed, I think, at hobbyists. You get 13 colors in the professional set, ranging from lemon yellow to black. The color names are not as, I would say, professional as the PWC. You get colors like, there are some like Permanent Yellow Deep is a more professional name, but you also get like brown for their burnt sienna color. So, that's, I don't know, not one of my favorites. And then you get violet rather than permanent violet. So it may just be a matter of preference. I've also never seen the professional watercolors sold open stock. So you can only buy them in sets, which is hard for me to recommend because what I usually recommend is people buy a smaller set and then add colors as they need them. If you're interested in trying these though, I'm going to link them down in the description below along with the PWC watercolors. The colors in the professional set are red, vermilion hue, permanent yellow deep, lemon yellow, yellow green, viridian hue, ultramarine, Prussian blue, violet, brown, yellow ochre, black, and then white. Other colors in the lineup are crimson lake, orange, permanent yellow light, jaune brilliant, olive green, emerald green hue, sap green, peacock green, cerulean blue hue, cobalt blue hue, Bordeaux, red violet, opera, red ochre, brown red, raw umber, and Van Dyke brown. So it seems like there's about 24 total colors in the ShinHan professional lineup. So what I'm doing here is I'm selecting similar colors or color duplicates, and we're going to do some comparative swatching. So we've got 2 yellow ochres, we've got 2 viridian hues, we've got 2 violets, we've got 2 cobalt blues, we have, I think those are Prussian blues, and then we have 2 burnt siennas or brown. And I'm using the same black Copic marker to apply our lines. Now something I noticed earlier, and it kind of bugs me. So Copic is not water reactive, shouldn't be water reactive. It's alcohol based. It should be alcohol reactive. But for some reason, there's something in a few of these PWC and ShinHan paints that kind of cause a little color chromatography. Kind of causes a little bleeding within the Copic. This doesn't normally happen. I haven't experienced this too many times, so I'm not really sure what's going on with that. And for this test, we're starting with the PWC color, and then we're going to follow up with the comparison professional watercolor. Once all our colors have been applied, I'm going to give them a chance to dry, and then we're going to do the lift test. You can see there's some color differences, like with the Viridian, with the Prussian Blue, with the Ultramarine. Now, to be fair, with the Ultramarine, one was Ultramarine Light and one was Ultramarine Deep. There's differences with the purples, and then there's differences a little bit with the burnt sienna, but they're not really big differences. So these colors have had a chance to dry. We're going to move on now to the lift test. Again, I'm using a synthetic brush just to apply some water, and then I'm dabbing it up with a paper towel just to see if it lifts and moves. The student grade professional and the PWC aren't that dissimilar. Neither are particularly prone to lifting. Both are very finely granulated. Some of the pigments do differ, and the PWC has more single pigment colors. For a student grade brand, when you compare it to the professional brand, the professional watercolors are really very good. They handle almost exactly like the professional watercolors. They have many of the same working qualities, and what really differs is just the pigments used, which is what I like to see when it comes to a student grade version of a professional watercolor. So next we're going to compare the PWC to the Magellan Mission Gold, which is another Korean brand. I reviewed the Mission Gold a while back. My review style for this review was very different from how I review watercolors now, but I really like them, and I find myself returning to them time and time again. There's several Mission Gold colors that are in my daily driver palette because I enjoy using them so much. You can also see where I've picked out some tubes for repeated use. So this is a watercolor set that I really enjoy using, and I do recommend, particularly if you can find them open stock, which has gotten increasingly difficult to do. Jerry's used to sell these open stock and they don't anymore, and I don't really understand why. Or if you can find a good deal on them online. Amazon used to have a crazy good price for these and the Mission Gold single pigment paints. These are not the single pigment paints. These are just the 24 set, I believe. But they still handle really well. So I've selected a few colors that seem like they would match well with the PWC colors. I wasn't necessarily aiming for like a perfect comparison. I mostly just want to see if they handle very similarly, if they have the same sort of translucency, if they have the same sort of shine on the paper, if you guys know what I mean. Some watercolors just seem very dull and flat on the paper, and then some seem really lively. So I'm just kind of trying to match some of these colors up loosely. The Magellan colors I'm going to be using in this comparison are Lemon Yellow. That's a Series B. It is PY3. It's 4 stars in light fastness. It's semi-transparent. Permanent Red, that uses pigment PR112. It has a 5-star light fastness. It's transparent and non-staining. Cobalt Blue number 1, which uses pigment PB29 and PB15 to a ratio of 3. It has a light fast rating of 5 stars. It's semi-transparent and semi-staining. Ultramarine Deep, which uses pigments PB29 and PB15. It has a light fast rating of 5. It's semi-transparent and semi-staining. Viridian, which uses pigment PG7, so that's the same as the PWC hue color, so that's interesting. Has a light fast rating of 5. It's fully transparent and semi-staining. Yellow Ochre number 1, which uses pigments PBR7, PY42, and PY150. Has a light fast rating of 5, semi-transparent and staining. Burnt Sienna, which uses PBR25, PR112, PY150. Has a light fast rating of 5. It's semi-transparent and it's staining. And Bright Clear Violet, which uses PV3 to a ratio of 1, PB29, PR122. It has a light fast rating of 2. It's semi-transparent, semi-staining. So those are the Magellan colors that I'm going to be using. So I'm swatching the Magellan colors first, and then we're going to go in with the PWC colors. In terms of handling, both Magellan and PWC handle very similarly. They're easy to use, they're not too goopy, and they have good color dispersion. I did try to match the colors by name rather than by pigments, and I'll compare the pigments after the paints have dried. So now that everything's had a chance to dry, it's time for ye olde lift test. Doing it the same way we've been doing it. I'm really pleased with how the ShinHan compares, particularly in terms of color vibrancy, clarity, and pigment load. And I'm happy to see all the single pigment colors as well. I'm really looking forward to doing the field test with these, so I hope you guys will keep an eye out for it. The Magellan is a smidge more likely to reactivate and possibly lift and transfer, although in repeated field tests, it wasn't really that big of an issue. Magellan does offer a single pigment lineup, but that's not the set I have here. So if you're looking for single pigment paints, this set ain't it. PWC has more single pigments in their mixing set, and out of what I purchased open stock, compared name for name with the selected colors from Magellan. So if PWC is available, that might be an option you want to check out rather than the Magellan. Although I love both, I recommend both, and they would play together really nicely. So at the beginning of this review, the PWC bodies really put me in mind of the Holbein's newer body. So I have here some Holbein, some older body, newer body, and some of the discontinued Irodori lineup. I really like Holbein's design, and I feel like it suits PWC quite well. They're very simple, it's easy to read at a glance, it's easy to find what you're looking for. Holbein makes a large array of colors, as does PWC, so I'm not going to attempt to compare the two sets in this video, but if you are interested in seeing me compare similar colors, I'll do it during a live stream at a later date. Let me know down in the comments below. So I did mention that I try to avoid reviews of these, but I did catch a couple while researching these paints, and one of them was on wet canvas, which usually I love, usually I trust. And a lot of the complaints on wet canvas was that the PWC don't really handle like professional grade watercolors. And I mean, this is just an unbox and swatch. This isn't the field test, but I feel like that's a disservice to PWC watercolors. Perhaps they don't handle like the Western style watercolors that those artists are very familiar with. They definitely don't handle like, say, Daniel Smith watercolors. They're very, very finely granulated. They don't have a lot of sedimentation. If you find that your work tends to look muddy, it could be because you're using too many paints that have different degrees of granulation. And finely ground paints like the PWC paints might be a good match for you. So I pulled out some of my Marie's professional Chinese watercolors because just on a surface level, the PWC kind of reminded me of how the Marie's looks in terms of packaging. But honestly, after swatching the PWC, seeing how clean some of these colors are, how transparent some of these colors are, with the exception of the two intentionally opaque colors, I can't really say they're an apt comparison to Chinese watercolors, which are, you know, designed to be painted more thickly. They intentionally are more opaque because that's just how that style of painting utilizes the paints. They're just very different animals. If I had the Korean colors, that would be a way more apt comparison. And I'd love to compare the discontinued Irodori with Chinese watercolors with the Korean watercolor lineup. So if I ever get that set, you'll have to keep an eye out for that. The verdict on these is I think I'm definitely going to buy more PWC, particularly if David's continues to carry it open stock, and especially if it continues to offer PWC at such a low price. I was very impressed by what I saw during this test, and I look forward to doing the field test and adding more colors to my collection. I would not recommend paying high online prices for these, not because they aren't good, but because it's really inflated. But if you can find them at a good deal, pick up a tube or two and try it. I particularly like their shade of Brilliant Pink. It's darker than Holbein's, and Purple Gray. It's a lovely dark peony color that I can see myself using frequently. So earlier in the video, way at the top of the video, we were looking at the painting glue that I purchased. Now, this was sold side by side right next to these PWC colors. And I know from like past research, when I was reviewing the professional colors, I knew that they had a line that was more traditional. That would be the Korean colors. This is not that line. The ShinHan painting glue, it says for professional artists Korean color, so I thought that meant the PWC, but I was wrong. So this painting glue, and you guys will see it in an upcoming shot really soon, the bottle says ShinHan Professional Painting Glue is a water-soluble glue made of liquefied gelatin used for improving adhesiveness of the paint to facilitate painting thick layers of Korean color on rice paper. ShinHan Professional Painting Glue is purified to sustain clean and vibrant colors of ShinHan Professional Korean colors. The print is tiny and it's still wrapped in plastic, so I apologize for that. So this is interesting in that there's our painting glue. It's interesting in that it is liquefied clean gelatin. Now I know that Gensai style watercolor and Chinese style watercolor use an animal hide glue, so this is probably very similar to that. But this is the first time I've actually gotten my hands on a bottle of it, and it would be fun to try mixing it with some Chinese watercolor pigments to see if I could easily make my own paint, since I know in traditional watercolor painting in Japan and in China, I don't know about Korea yet, but I'm still researching that. Often artists will mix the paints as they go rather than buying pre-mixed paint. So it would be a fun thing to do later on to figure out if I could do that myself and see if I actually like doing it. So the ShinHan site says, are there any mediums that should be used when we paint with artist Korean colors, and that would be the use for the painting glue. Anyway, I had a lot of fun unboxing and swatching and talking about the PWC watercolors with you guys. I hope you guys will look forward to my upcoming field test because I sure am, and I'm definitely going to add more of these watercolors to my watercolor collection. We've reviewed a bunch of different professional watercolors over the years, and honestly, I'm just always excited when